Beloved, this is how Reverend Mary begins the service each week at Common Cathedral in Boston. Common Cathedral is an outdoor church community that centers people who are experiencing homelessness in the city of Boston as the primary makeup of their congregation. So they worship outside on Boston Common every single Sunday afternoon in all weather. And that is the beginning of every service. Beloved! And then they do something a little bit different than most of us are used to in our own congregations. You see, they begin their service by sharing a meal together. There are tables spread out around the fountain on Boston Common filled with sandwiches, turkey and peanut butter and jelly and roast beef and ham and cheese, and piled with fruit and snacks, and a table with huge containers of water and lemonade in the summer or hot chocolate in the winter. And they begin their worship by gathering and sharing this meal with anyone who comes and attends. Beloved, they begin. This morning, we're celebrating Good Shepherd Sunday, which happens on the fourth Sunday of Easter every year, and we get these gospel readings about how Jesus is the Good Shepherd. I am the Good Shepherd, or perhaps a better translation is, I am the true shepherd. But this section of the gospel that we get each year on the fourth Sunday of Easter, it changes up a little bit, but it's kind of the end of a larger narrative. What actually happens in this story, it begins way back at the beginning of chapter 9, when Jesus encounters a man who was born blind. And his disciples and this man's community begin by asking Jesus, what did this man do? What sins does he carry that he was born blind? What sins does this man carry that he was born blind? But Jesus doesn't really answer their question, because the important thing for Jesus is that the man is blind. And Jesus begins by spitting in some dirt and creating mud and wiping it on the man's eyes. And this man, who has never seen Jesus, but has only heard his voice, listens. And Jesus tells him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And this man does that. He hears the voice of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, and he goes and washes in the pool, and his vision is miraculously restored. For the first time in his life, he is able to see. And so naturally, he goes around and he begins to tell his story. I was born blind. I was the man that you know that has been blind since birth. And now I met this man, Jesus, and I can see. He has healed me. You see, Common Cathedral, I think, recognizes something that Jesus also recognizes in this gospel. They begin by sharing lunch together because their leadership recognized that when people's bellies are empty, it is very difficult for them to focus on their relationship with God, to focus on their faith and spirituality and their belief. And so they begin by first healing this need by filling people's bellies. I'm sure you all know and have experienced how difficult it is to concentrate on anything really when we're hangry. Even being nice to each other gets to be really difficult, doesn't it? And so they begin their worship by feeding people who have not had a meal since perhaps the day before or even longer. And Jesus begins this story by healing this man's sight, by making a man who was blind able to see again for the first time. Because Jesus seems to recognize that this man needs to be able to see first. And because this man is able to see, he begins to go around and tell his story. He tells everyone that this man, Jesus, healed him and that it's miraculous. And then, of course, not only does he tell people, he goes and tells the religious authorities who, not unusually or out of character for them, are not really very happy with this news. And they choose to cast this man out of the community, to cast this man out of the temple, because what he's saying cannot possibly be true. This man that is claiming to be the Son of God cannot possibly be the Son of God. And they don't like it, so they cast him out. They cast him out of his faith community. But Jesus, the true shepherd, hears that this blind man has been cast out. And he goes and he searches for this lost sheep, this sheep that has been ostracized from his faith community. He goes and finds this man, and they have a conversation. Because now, like the people whose bellies have been filled at Common Cathedral, this man's sight has been healed, and he can listen in a new way. His faith can grow in a new way. He can come to belong to the fold in a new way. He can become a part of Jesus' flock because he has been healed and has experienced this miracle. I witnessed the same thing happening at Common Cathedral almost every week, because there would be hundreds of people who would come together to share lunch, to join in this meal, and many of them would leave as soon as the lunch portion was over. And a much smaller group would stay for the worship service, would stay to pray together. But every week there were some new people that would join in their version of the back pews, who would hang on the edges and witness what was happening after lunch took place, after people's bellies were filled. The people hanging out on the margins of the gathered community, on the margins of the flock, just listening and watching and seeing what it was that was happening in that space. And as the weeks would go by, some of those people from those back pews would begin to come a little closer and would begin to find themselves as members of the flock that was gathered. People who were sought out and found and come into that fold. And some of those became very active members of that community over time, all because we started by feeding their bellies. It's not unlike what we hear in this first letter of John this morning. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? This letter of John goes on to talk about how love is not static, but it is a dynamic act. It's about action and truth. And that was true at Common Cathedral. We began by filling people's bellies, an action of love, an act of love. And because that act of love happened, people came to belong. Their healing led to belonging, not unlike the blind man who was healed by Jesus. His healing leads to belonging. And it's only then that Jesus gets into this discourse, after this healing has happened, after this man has found belonging in the flock of Jesus. Then it is that Jesus goes into this long discourse about being the good shepherd, the true shepherd. It's then that he's able to teach the people who are following him. After healing has happened, after belonging has happened, and that has now led to an opportunity to deepen faith, to deepen belief. It is because Jesus begins with healing, an act of love, that more people come into the fold and find belonging, that more people are opened up to deepening their faith within that community, within that flock, and that more people are able to participate in these acts of love, to find love and to share it through action and truth. Beloved,